What's the deal, everybody? Today in the studio, we are going over Panasonic and its autofocus features, which I have notoriously spoken horribly about in the past. But I think I may have broken the code because my last few shoots, I've got it to work reliably and flawlessly, and I'm gonna go over how I managed to do that right now. All right, as I just mentioned, we are going over the autofocus system, and I'll start off by mentioning the fact that I have so many times ragged on this system, and I think it's because I've really found out its flaw and how to compensate for that flaw. Now, where the Panasonic autofocus system is really bad is close-up. The closer you are and the more bokeh you're trying to apply to your background, the more heavy breathing it does. And that's the biggest problem with the Panasonic autofocus, in my opinion, is the breathing aspect. It's not that it takes a long time to autofocus or that it tracks you horribly. It's just that, I guess it does track you horribly if it's breathing constantly, but that's its biggest issue. So I think I may have figured out the problem. Now, I'm using my Enzucchio Olympus lens, the same one I did a review on recently. You can check that out over there if you'd like. But whenever I'm doing my agent interviews, I've noticed if I keep my lens on about f5 and keep my agent at about 3/4 or half view, I'm not trying to go in super tight for a full face shot, for a full-on like portrait shot, the autofocus seems to work great. So whenever you're kicking it down to like f2.8 or below, that's when the autofocus system seems to really have issues. Trying to figure out a way to make this a little comical or interesting at least. Either way, if you like this, please press like, mash subscribe, all that jazz. Help me out with the algorithm. Let's get back to it. So what I've been doing recently is I put the camera on the gimbal, set it to f5, ISO 1600. I have a little roto light that you might be able to see in the background back there somewhere, but I bring that in a little octabox on a stand, put it as close as I can to where the agent will be stopping their walkthrough, and I follow them gently. Now, I'll throw up a little bit of footage on the screen so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Whenever you're trying to get these up close and personal shots with this GH5S in particular, this breathing is unbearable. That's why whenever I shoot my YouTube videos, I now shoot them all in a fixed focal plane. So if I go too far back, I get way out of focus. And if I come too far forward, I will in retrospect do the same. But that being said, I also shoot at f2.8 in here when I'm shooting. ISO 400. Boom, there you go. Now look at this footage that I'm talking about that I did of one of my recent agent walkthroughs. I've got it set, like I just mentioned, f5, ISO 1600, since that's the secondary dual native ISO for this camera. And look how beautifully it tracks her every single time. Now we did this walkthrough move probably 10, maybe 12 different times so she could get it just perfectly. But as you can see, it never loses her face. Even when I pull away on the island to show how big the island is and the rest of the space around her and come back in, it tracks her face very naturally with no breathing. Why is that? I don't really know. I think it has something to do with the fact that not only is my f-stop a little larger, so it's giving me a lot more room to not notice the breathing. And since I'm doing an agent interview walkthrough anyway, showing the house is a really good thing. You don't necessarily want to blur everything out because she's there to talk about this property. Now, cranking up that f-stop is key, I think, in this. And I think it might be something with the ISO 1600. Whenever I shoot here in my studio, I always shoot ISO 400, which is the original native ISO, and I notice a lot more of the breathing. Whenever I put it on ISO 1600, I notice the breathing a whole lot less. I don't know what makes that happen. It's just what I have personally noticed from my experience with the GH5S. That is the camera we're talking about, and that is everything we're going about. So if you want to get some really crystal clear agent interview shots walking around on your gimbal, that's what I recommend. I recommend bringing a small battery powered light to set at the end, just in case you need a little bit of extra light. But even if you don't have that, shooting on ISO 1600, the secondary dual native ISO, and f-stop 5 would be crucial. Maybe that's just the prime spot for the lens that I am using right now, f5. I don't know. But cranking up that f-stop definitely helped, and I'm going to consider that cracking the code for now. I hope all this helps you figure out your GH5S a little bit more and decide to keep it around instead of throwing it in the garbage for that new Sony a7 III that everyone is raving about. This camera is great and I still continue to use it daily. That's all. As always, keep enjoying yourself, rock and roll, make smart business decisions, and I'll catch you next time.